Okay, once you have your sound bites cut, and that can take a while because you really want to listen to it and really make sure that you're telling that story effectively. And for most of you, your soundbite cuts probably going to run about maybe 2 minutes long, something like that. Might be a little bit more, might be a little bit less, but then anticipate that your final video will be a little bit longer than that, just in that it generally happens when you start adding the B-roll. So you'll want to be sure that you're just telling the story with the sound bites. We never hear the questions, and you will not use like text or anything to include the questions. So it'll just be from the sound bite. So you're going to need to be able to tell it from just the answers that the person gave. Okay, then we need to start going in with the B-roll. So before we do that, here at the moment, the first soundbite starts.
Ever since I was a young boy, my passion's been team roping.
Okay, so I want to look for something that is going to help represent that helps introduce our story. And the way you're going to start and end these projects is on B-roll. And there can always be exceptions to this, but I think you'll notice that most documentaries are going to start this way. So if you take the track select forward tool and move your clips down, that's going to leave some room to start out on some B-roll before we start hearing the first soundbite. So I'm going to go into my footage, and I find it helpful to have a tab that is for the footage in icon view, whereas to have my project pane in list view I find more effective because I can easily go between whether I need to go into sequences or footage or graphics or audio, whatever. So I'm going to open this up. I'm going to double click on extra. It created a new panel. Grab where it has the name on it and wait until this center portion is highlighted, not up here but down in the center. Let go and it'll make a tab over here. Now this can start getting really crowded, so history, you want to keep history because it's sort of like your undo redo list. Markers, I don't really find that very useful, so I'll get rid of that. Effects you're going to probably want for some of the audio transitions. Info, it's not very useful. And you might need to use Media Browser if you're using AVC HD footage, but many of you probably will only need your project pane, effects, and history. And then if you have a bin here with your clips, then you can go into icon view and it can just make it a little bit easier to find what you're after, but then if you need to go into here, you can do that. And like I have different bins for different parts, so you might find it helpful to divide your B-roll into different topics if that helps you find what you're looking for more effective or efficiently. Alright, so his first soundbite is talking about when ever since he was a little boy, he's wanted to team rope or liked team roping. So I do happen to have this shot of this kid throwing a loop. Okay, so I do have that. So we could use this as an intro because it kind of shows a kid. Now another option would be, because he's talking about team roping, another option would be find a shot of team roping. So there's a lot. There could be a variety of ways of starting, and just kind of trying to see what helps introduce your story more effectively. Let's just see what happens if we start out this way. Well, not a very good example of team roping. Let's see if this one's any better. There we go. Okay. All right. So the reason I want you to have some space at the beginning is because you're going to start on B-roll, and then you might have just one shot, you might have a series of shots, just kind of depends on the situation. And then while we're seeing that B-roll, at some point we'll start hearing the first soundbite, but not necessarily see the person speaking. Okay? Now, you can see I have, this is 720 footage, that's this clip, over a 1080 interview. So I'm going to, if I scale this up, if I do, where'd it go? Upscale to frame size. That will automatically scale that up. You can also do it manually up here in your effect controls. But what we end up with is,
ever since I was a young boy, my passion's been team roping.
okay? So, and then you have to kind of decide on pacing. That felt like it came in just a little bit late, so I might move that down a little bit. Remember, you're going to start out with a fade up from black, and the audio is going to have to fade up too. So one simple way of doing that, because these this video and audio are linked, they're from the same clip, and you can tell that because when that's selected, both become selected. If I move my cursor to the very beginning and right click and choose Apply Default, it'll automatically add the fade up on the video and the audio.
Ever since I was a young boy.
Now with that fade up, now it feels like this is a little too early. So it helps to kind of start getting a sense of that.
Ever since I was a young boy, my passion's been team roping.
Okay, and let's let that go a little bit longer. Maybe we won't show the calf being all stretched out. Okay. So now we can go to another shot. So now we just kind of have to figure out, is there what else I could go to? That's not going to work. What's that? Oh, this might work because it's a nice close-up. So we were on a wide shot there. Let's see. It might work. Let me try. Because remember, you want to have some variety in your shots. So that could be kind of cool. All right. So now you're going to want to bring down the audio with your video. Now, the problem I have here, which is kind of a bummer, I shot a bunch of this stuff in slow motion, and when you shoot that way, it doesn't come with audio. So that doesn't work very well for this demonstration, but what I can do is, because this clip doesn't have any audio, I'm going to hold down the Alt Option key to just select that audio and delete it, and now hold the Alt Option key and stretch this audio from the first clip underneath this second one. So let's see how that works.
since I was a young boy, my passion's been team roping. The hardest part about...
Okay, so now the audio from that clip is kind of loud. We can just bring the level down. Okay, so when...
Ever since I was a young boy.
Okay, now if there was, I'm going to undo, if there was some really good audio that went with that, but it was too loud for being underneath him talking, I can keyframe that audio. Let me scale this up a little bit. I can keyframe that audio so that it ducks down underneath that soundbite. So the simplest way to do this, if you hold down the Command key or Control on a PC, and you notice the cursor changes when it's at that volume line. Click and click, and now I can bring this down so it's now quieter, and the distance between these two keyframes will determine how quickly that transition happens. If it needs to be slower or take longer, you can move those apart. So now if I go,
Ever since I was a young...
you know, and so this may need to be even lower. I could grab it anywhere from in there, but
Ever since I was a young boy, my passion's been team roping.
now that yeah mic, that's kind of cool. Okay, so I'm going to have a little net sound break here. I hadn't planned on that, but this is a cool opportunity because that yeah mic is kind of nice. All right, so that's right in here. So let's keyframe that up. A net sound break is a natural sound break where you take advantage of the audio that came with the B-roll, have it up full in between sound bites. And so we're just hearing the audio that went with that B-roll. Now, okay, I realize we're faking it here, but let's see what happens. So I'm holding down the Command key. I'm on a Mac. If it was on a PC, I'd hold down the Control key. And now I don't want it to hold for too long. So, oops. All right. So I have 4 keyframes. I'm going to bring it up so that when she says, "Yeah, Mike," we hear that better. And then it's going to duck down, and then I'm going to move this soundbite down here and see how it flows.
Ever since I was a young boy, my passion's been team roping. The hardest part about team roping is...
So this could probably go a little lower, and that could probably go a little lower. Okay.
Ever since I was a young boy, my passion's been team roping. The hardest part about team roping is making sure that you're a good horseman.
Okay. Now, we have to decide when we're going to cut. I want to show him. We don't have to show him at this point, but it could be a good point to do that. So,
the hardest part about team roping is making sure that you're a good horseman.
now, one thing I learned a long time ago from a really nice book about editing, a suggestion that if you want to make a hard cut or a cut that has more impact, that if you cut from one shot to another on a word that starts with a consonant, it can make for a harder cut. And so now,
the hardest part about team roping is...
I think I'm going to go to team roping.
Team roping.
Yeah, let's try that. So, I'm just going to bring that down. And
my passion's been team roping. hardest part about team roping is making.
That's not too bad. Oh, I can see I'm just a little bit off there. Yeah, maybe. Let's see what happens. And you just have to play with it. And, you don't have to get too obsessed with it because this may all change. It's possible you're going to just lose that soundbite, take it out. It's possible that you may find other B-roll. So don't get too crazy about all of this on this first adding of B-roll because it's very likely to change. But at least you can kind of start roughing it in.
The hardest part about team roping is making sure.
Okay, so another thing is when we go from the B-roll to the interview, it's going to be a hard cut. Do not use a dissolve. Do not use any other transitions. They're not necessary. And then the other thing is when we go back to B-roll, then it's a hard cut again. So let's just see what we got here. Okay, so I'm going to bring this down. And now, one of the things that you have to anticipate is when we see the person from the interview the first time, that's when you are going to include the lower third to identify them. Excuse me.
The hardest part about team roping is making sure that you're a good horseman.
Okay. So the thing about that is you need enough time for that lower third to be on screen. And the general rule of thumb for graphics is that you leave up a graphic long enough to read twice. And so the good thing about that is it's self-adjusting. If you have a lot of words on the screen, then it has to hold longer. If you don't have very many words, then it doesn't need to stay on for as long. What I've seen over the years of doing a ton of interviews is that often a lower third will need to hold on screen for roughly 5 to 6 seconds. So when you're adding your B-roll, you're going to need a spot that has about 5 to 6 seconds of no cuts within the interview. And so here I just marked from in to out. That is 5 seconds and 17 frames. So that's pretty close. Don't worry about getting it too exact. Let's go just even a little bit farther, just so that I have plenty to work with. So now that's a little over 6 seconds and 4 frames. So that is a good starting point. That may change, So, but at least I've got something in there.
As a young boy, my passion's been team roping. The hardest part about team roping is making sure that you're a good horseman, that you control the horse.
So you notice how that audio just cuts out?
Making sure that you're a good horseman.
That's the audio from that B-roll. There's some different things you can do. Sometimes what I will do, and I could do it with keyframing, I can also just go into audio transitions, crossfade, and drop a fade on that and let it just kind of over time slowly fade out as he's talking. And
the hardest part about team roping is making sure that you're a good horseman, that you can.
And that way it just sort of smoothly transitions out. I will also, though this isn't a good example because it doesn't have any audio, but a lot of times I will do the same, especially if the audio is really loud, like cars or equipment or something like that. I will often start fading it up so that when we finally see that B-roll, the audio is full up to whatever level it's going to be. So that is kind of jumping ahead a little bit to talking about audio sweetening, but that can be a nice way to go to just kind of start smoothing out some of those transitions, because sometimes when you're working with it, it just feels too abrupt or too loud, and so want to give you some things that you can try just at least as a starting point to kind of see how it's working. So as a reminder, when you go from the interview to the B-roll, it's going to be a hard cut.
He puts you in the right spot each time, and that's your responsibility.
Okay, so if we were going to have some music, we could have that. If we had some actual net sound, then that would go in there.
Competitive person. I've always loved horses.
Okay, so you would just keep going through. If you are not sure if you like a particular shot, a lot of times I will, and this isn't a good example, but just because I already used that shot once before, let me just see if I've got something else that I can go to. Let's just experiment. So let's say I want to just see, does this shot work better? I can place it above the shot that I have there currently and just kind of see which one I like better. Oh, okay, I better scale that. Scale the frame size. There we go.
He puts you in the right spot each time, and that's your responsibility.
So I'm using that horse as kind of a natural wipe.
He puts you in the right spot each time, and that's your responsibility.
Okay, so that could be cool. If I want to see what the shot is that I had before, I can turn off the eyeball and see. So I can decide if I like this shot better, I can just leave it. If I don't, I can just delete it. So that can be a handy way to just sort of experiment, because the first part you're going to be putting in B-roll. A couple things to watch out for. The most common mistakes are to hold shots way too long. And so you're going to have to be careful that you don't do that. So you're going to need to have the shots changing depending on what the action is, but don't hold your shots too long. The other thing that I want to cover, let's see, where's his shot where he goes out? Okay, it's here someplace. Okay, come on. Where is it? He's someplace in here. Okay. Nope, that's not it. Alright, so I'm going to keep looking. Oh, maybe this is it. Nope. Okay. So I'm not finding the shot that I wanted to end it on, but that's okay. We'll just find another shot, right? I just kind of keep hoping that I'll find it, but it doesn't matter. So for the ending, what you're going to want to do is end on some B-roll after the last soundbite. So the B-roll should help bring your story to a close, and you should also have it extend beyond the last soundbite. And so let's just go something. Okay, we'll just pretend. Okay, so let's just go here. Okay. So I've got here. All right. So when this comes to an end,
Before I won my first buckle.
let me scale that. There we go. Okay.
No, I was second place 17 times in 4 years before I won my first buckle. When I caught my first steer, it was down in Arizona. And
so as a reminder, anytime you have a cut within the interview, that's going to have to be covered by B-roll.
Raced down full tilt, caught my first steer, and I was elated.
Okay, so you're going to have the B-roll extend beyond the last soundbite. How long it extends, that's going to be a choice that you're going to have to make as far as how long that it feels like it needs to hold. But it can help to have kind of a sense of closure and finding a good shot. Finding a good shot that kind of helps sum up the final story. Okay? So it's got to bring it to a conclusion. And then, so that's going to be kind of the B-roll process, going through, making sure that you're telling the story well, making sure that you cover the interview and that you are covering any cuts within the interview. There may be times when you do have to give them some FaceTime. One time that can be helpful is if you are going from kind of a wide shot to a similar wide shot. It can sometimes help to cut a little bit of FaceTime. It also helps when there's some really nice facial expression or an emotion that the audience really should see rather than having that hidden. And then the other thing is when you're covering with B-roll, you are going to be doing it in a way that hides the cuts, okay? But be careful that you don't do this, because this, I'm going to get rid of these. Do not just have like a little band-aid to cover that cut and show mostly interview.
My first steer, it was down in Arizona, and I raced down full tilt.
Right, because it just looks dorky to just suddenly cut to some B-roll and then cut back to them. So you're going to want to maybe have a series of shots that go together, then to hide that cut, but also to help tell that story more effectively. Another thing that you will not do is have soundbite where we just see the person the whole time, and then here, and then cut to B-roll, and then cut to interview, and then here, let's do it this way. So you've got to see this. I've had people do this kind of a thing where they just barely use any B-roll to cover the story, and it looks really dorky. I've also had people do where they will have soundbite where we just see the person, and then they go to a montage to music, and then they go to a soundbite, and then a montage to music. Do not do that. You may use a little montage to music at some point, but don't do that every single time between sound bites. So 1 or 2 short ones, maybe 5 seconds or so, might be okay, but you need to cover the majority of the interview with the B-roll. Okay, so go through, start covering it. Let me see if I've got to find where that I have a final demo version. If you wanted to incorporate music, you are welcome to. Again, it has to be copyright free, but you can do something like this where you've got a little montage and then the interview. Okay, the next tutorial is going to be about kind of the next step, which will be creating your lower third, as well as the audio sweetening process.